Tessa Brooks stood backstage at the Crystal Heights Winter Charity Gala, her hands trembling so violently she had to clasp them together to make them stop. Through the gap in the heavy velvet curtains, she could see hundreds of elegantly dressed guests mingling in the grand ballroom, their laughter and conversation creating a wall of sound that made her stomach twist with anxiety. The piano on stage gleamed under the bright lights, waiting for her like a silent judge. She should not be here. She should be home with Ruby, her 8-year-old daughter, helping with homework or reading bedtime stories. But Ruby's medical bills had piled so high that Tessa could barely see over them anymore, and when the event coordinator had offered her $200 to play background music for 30 minutes, Tessa had swallowed her fear and said yes. Her phone buzzed in the pocket of her borrowed blue dress. A text from Mrs. Chin, her neighbor who was watching Ruby. "She's asking when you'll be home. Getting tired but fighting sleep to wait for you." Tessa's heart squeezed. Ruby had been so brave during all the doctor appointments, all the treatments, never complaining even when she felt terrible. The latest round of tests had revealed they needed a specialized surgery that insurance would not fully cover. Tessa had $12,000 in debt already. The surgery would add $30,000 more. The number felt impossible, like trying to count stars. "You're up in 2 minutes, the stage manager whispered, appearing beside her with a clipboard. "Remember, just play softly. Your background ambience." Tessa nodded, not trusting her voice. She had chosen to play a piece she had found 5 years ago at a thrift store, tucked inside an old piano book. The sheet music had been handwritten, the notes flowing across the pages in careful precision. The title at the top read "Winter's Promise," with no composer name attached. Something about the melody had called to her the moment she saw it, as if she had heard it before in a dream she could not quite remember. She had learned it slowly over months, practicing late at night when Ruby slept, letting the haunting notes fill their small apartment. The melody was beautiful but tinged with sadness, like remembering something precious that was lost. It felt personal, intimate, as if whoever wrote it had poured their whole heart onto the page. The stage manager gestured and Tessa forced her legs to move. She walked onto the stage, the bright lights momentarily blinding her. The conversations continued, barely anyone noticing her arrival. She preferred to be invisible. She sat at the piano bench, adjusted her position, and placed her fingers on the keys. For a moment she closed her eyes and thought of Ruby's smile, her laughter, the way she said, "I love you, Mama," every single night. Tessa could do this. She had to do this. She began to play. The opening notes were soft, delicate, like the first snowflakes of winter touching the ground. Her fingers moved across the keys with growing confidence, the muscle memory taking over where her nerves had tried to fail her. The melody unfolded, each phrase building on the last, creating something that felt both melancholy and hopeful at the same time. Across the ballroom, near the champagne fountain, Julian Reed stood among a group of business associates discussing fourth-quarter projections. He was only half listening, his mind already planning his exit. These charity galas were necessary for maintaining his company's public image, but after 2 hours of small talk and forced smiles, he was ready to leave. Then he heard it. The first 3 notes made him pause mid-sentence. The next phrase made his blood run cold. By the time the melody reached the bridge, his champagne glass had slipped from his fingers, shattering on the marble floor in a spray of glass and liquid that made everyone around him jump back in surprise. "Julian, are you all right?" someone asked, but their voice sounded distant, underwater. He could not breathe. He could not move. That melody, he knew that melody. He had not heard it in 15 years, but he would recognize it anywhere, in any context, even if he were dying. Winter's Promise. The song Camille had written for him during their last winter together in college, before she vanished from his life without explanation, leaving only a recorded version of this exact melody and a letter saying she had to go, that she was sorry, that she would always love him. He had spent years searching for her. Years hiring investigators, following leads that went nowhere, hoping every time his phone rang that it would be her voice on the other end. But Camille Wright had disappeared as completely as if she had never existed. Eventually, he had been forced to accept that she either did not want to be found or something terrible had happened to her. And now, 15 years later, someone was playing her song. Julian pushed through the crowd, ignoring the concerned questions from colleagues and friends. His heart pounded so hard he thought it might break through his ribs. He had to see who was playing. He had to know how they knew this melody. He reached the edge of the crowd gathered around the stage and stopped, his breath catching in his throat. The woman at the piano was not Camille. This woman's hair was styled differently, cut shorter. Her face was thinner, older, marked by years of struggle that showed in the slight shadows under her eyes and the tension in her shoulders. She wore a simple blue dress that had seen better days, and her hands moved across the keys with practiced precision but also with something else, something that made Julian's chest ache. She played as if the melody meant something to her, as if every note carried weight and memory. But she was not Camille. Julian would have recognized Camille anywhere, would not he? 15 years change people, but not that much. Not enough to make him doubt. The song reached its crescendo, the part where Camille had written in a series of complex chord progressions that somehow captured the feeling of standing in snow and watching something beautiful slip away. The woman's fingers flew across the keys, hitting every note perfectly, and Julian saw a single tear slide down her cheek. She knew this song. Not just the notes but the emotion behind it, the meaning. The final notes faded into silence, and for a moment the entire ballroom was quiet. Then applause erupted, polite and appreciative. The woman stood from the bench, gave a small bow, and quickly walked off stage as if she could not wait to escape. Julian did not think. He moved on instinct, weaving through the crowd toward the backstage area. Security tried to stop him, but he flashed his VIP credentials and kept moving. He had to talk to her. He had to know where she learned that song. He found her in a dim hallway, leaning against the wall with her eyes closed, breathing hard as if she had just run a marathon. "Excuse me," Julian said, his voice coming out rougher than he intended. The woman's eyes flew open, and for a split second, Julian saw something in them that made his heart stop. A flicker of recognition, of confusion, of something he could not name. Then it was gone, replaced by wariness. "I'm sorry, I'm not supposed to talk to guests," she said quickly. "I was just hired to play. I should go." "Wait, please." Julian held up his hands, trying to appear non-threatening even though everything inside him was screaming. "I just need to know where you learned that song." "Winter's Promise." "Where did you get it?" The woman, Tessa, he would later learn, stared at him with wide eyes. I found the sheet music at a thrift store. 5 years ago." "Why? Who composed it? Was there a name?" "No. Just the title." She wrapped her arms around herself, defensive. "Why does it matter?" Julian struggled to find words. How could he explain 15 years of grief and searching to a stranger? How could he make her understand that hearing that melody again had torn open wounds he thought had finally scarred over? "Someone I knew wrote that song," he said finally. "A long time ago. Someone I lost. Hearing it again. I just needed to know." Tessa's expression softened slightly, though the wariness remained. "I'm sorry for your loss." "She's not dead," Julian said automatically, then paused. "At least I don't think she is. She just disappeared." The hallway fell silent except for the muffled sounds of the gala continuing in the ballroom. Tessa shifted her weight, clearly uncomfortable, and Julian realized he was keeping her from leaving. "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't mean to corner you. I'm Julian Reed. I own Reed Enterprises." He pulled out his wallet and extracted a business card, then hesitated. This woman clearly needed money if she was taking gig work at charity events. An idea formed, reckless and impulsive, but Julian had not built a billion-dollar company by overthinking. "You played beautifully tonight," he said. "I'd like to hire you." Tessa blinked. "Hire me? For private events. Company functions. I'll pay 10 times what you made tonight, plus I'll cover any expenses you have." He saw her start to shake her head and added quickly, "I noticed your hands. You're wearing a hospital bracelet under your sleeve. If you or someone you love needs medical care, I can help with that too." Tessa's hand flew to her wrist, covering the faded bracelet she had forgotten to remove. Her face went through several emotions: shame, anger, desperation, and finally resignation. "My daughter," she whispered. "She needs surgery. I can't afford it." "Let me help," Julian said immediately. "Please. No strings attached, no conditions. Just let me help." Could you really refuse help when your child's life hangs in the balance? Would you swallow your pride if it meant saving the person you love most? Drop a comment below telling us what you would do, and don't forget to subscribe for the rest of this emotional journey. Tessa stared at this stranger, this impossibly wealthy man who had materialized out of nowhere, offering to solve her biggest problem with what seemed like effortless ease. Every instinct screamed that this could not be real, that there had to be a catch, that people like him did not help people like her without wanting something in return. But she thought of Ruby, her brave, beautiful girl who had endured so much already. Ruby who should be running and playing and living without pain, instead of spending her days managing symptoms and trying not to complain because she knew her mother was already stressed. "Why?" Tessa asked, her voice breaking. "Why would you help us?" Julian met her eyes, and she saw genuine emotion there, raw and unguarded. Because that song you played means something to me. Because the person who wrote it was the kindest soul I ever knew and she would want me to help. Because I can, and that should be reason enough. Tessa felt tears building behind her eyes. She had been alone for so long, struggling and fighting and barely keeping her head above water. The idea of accepting help felt like admitting defeat, like proving she could not handle her own life. But maybe admitting you needed help was not weakness. Maybe it was wisdom. Okay, she whispered. Okay. Thank you. Julian's entire body relaxed as if he had been holding his breath. Can I have your contact information? I'll have my assistant reach out tomorrow to set up the medical care and discuss employment details. Tessa gave him her phone number with shaking fingers, still not quite believing this was happening. Julian typed it into his phone, then looked at her with an expression she could not quite read. What's your name? He asked. Tessa Brooks. Something flickered in Julian's eyes, disappointment maybe, but he hid it quickly. It's nice to meet you, Tessa. I'll be in touch tomorrow. He turned to leave, then paused. That song. Winter's Promise. Would you be willing to play it again sometime? Maybe somewhere quieter where I can really listen. Tessa nodded, not trusting her voice. Julian smiled, small and sad, and walked away, leaving Tessa alone in the hallway with her heart pounding and her mind racing. She did not understand what had just happened, did not know why this man cared so much about a melody from a thrift store, but she knew her life had just changed in ways she could not yet comprehend. She pulled out her phone and texted Mrs. Chin, "On my way home. Everything is going to be okay." For the first time in years she actually believed it. The music practice rooms at Westfield University were tucked away in the basement of the Fine Arts Building, a maze of soundproofed cubicles where students spent hours perfecting their craft. Room 7B had become Julian Reed's favorite spot on campus, not because of its acoustics or amenities, but because every Tuesday and Thursday at 3 in the afternoon, he could hear someone playing the most beautiful piano music through the thin walls. He had been studying in Room 7A for weeks, working on business projections and market analysis for his entrepreneurship class, when he finally admitted to himself that he was not actually getting any work done. He was just listening, captivated by the music flowing from next door. It was a Thursday in late September, the campus covered in falling leaves, when Julian finally decided to see who was creating such beautiful melodies. He packed up his books, stepped into the hallway and knocked on the door of Room 7B. "Come in," a voice called. Julian opened the door and found himself staring at the most striking woman he had ever seen. She sat at the piano, sheet music spread across the stand, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail that revealed her graceful neck and shoulders. She wore a green sweater and jeans, nothing fancy, but she carried herself with a natural elegance that made Julian forget how to speak for a full 5 seconds. "Can I help you?" she asked, turning on the bench to face him fully. Her eyes were warm and curious, her smile friendly. Sorry," Julian managed. "I've been studying next door and kept hearing you play. You're incredible." She laughed, a sound that felt like sunshine breaking through clouds. "Thank you. I'm Camille. Camille Wright. Music composition major, 4th year. Julian Reed. Business major, also 4th year." He hesitated in the doorway, suddenly aware he was intruding. "I should let you get back to practice. Do you want to listen?" Camille asked, surprising him. "I mean, if you're going to be studying next door anyway, you might as well be comfortable. There's a chair in the corner." Julian should have said no. He had a presentation to prepare, reading to finish, a million things demanding his attention. Instead he said, "I'd like that," and stepped inside. That afternoon became a pattern. Julian would study in Room 7B while Camille composed and practiced, and somehow they both got more work done than they ever had alone. Between songs they talked. Camille told him about growing up with a single mother who worked 3 jobs to pay for piano lessons. Julian shared his dreams of starting his own company, of building something that mattered. "What kind of company?" Camille asked one day, her fingers idly playing scales. "I'm not sure yet," Julian admitted. "Something in technology maybe? Or consulting. I just know I want to create jobs, help people build better lives." Camille smiled at him, and Julian felt his heart do something complicated in his chest. "You have a good heart, Julian Reed. Play me something new," he said, deflecting the compliment because he did not know how to handle the way she looked at him. Camille's hands moved to the keys, and she began a melody that felt different from her usual practice pieces. This one was raw, unfinished, but achingly beautiful. It started soft and built slowly, like a story unfolding. "What's that?" Julian asked when she finished. "I don't know yet. I started writing it last week." It's about beginnings, I think. New chapters. Hope. She glanced at him, and something in her expression made Julian's breath catch. Meeting people who change your perspective. By October, they were spending every afternoon together. By November, Julian had admitted to himself that he was falling in love. By December, when the campus was covered in the first snow of winter, he finally found the courage to tell her. They had been walking back from the library, their breath fogging in the cold air, when Julian stopped under a streetlight. "Camille, I need to tell you something." She turned to face him, snowflakes catching in her hair. "Okay." "I'm in love with you," Julian said, the words coming out in a rush. "I have been since that first day in the practice room. I know we're both busy and graduation is coming and the future is uncertain, but I needed you to know. You're the most amazing person I've ever met." Camille stared at him for a long moment and Julian's heart sank. He had misread everything. She was going to let him down gently, tell him she only wanted to be friends. Then she smiled, bright and genuine, and said, "I'm in love with you too." Julian kissed her right there under the streetlight, with snow falling around them and students passing by with knowing smiles. It felt like the beginning of everything. They spent the winter as a couple, navigating final exams and thesis projects while building a relationship that felt solid and real. Julian shared his business plans with Camille, and she helped him think through the human elements he sometimes overlooked in his focus on numbers. Camille played her compositions for Julian, and he helped her see the emotional depth in her own work. In February, she unveiled the finished version of the melody she had been working on since September. "I'm calling it Winter's Promise," she told him, sitting at the piano in room 7B. "It's about meeting someone who makes you believe in the future." She played it for him from beginning to end, and Julian listened with tears in his eyes. The melody captured everything they had built together, the hope and possibility and love that felt infinite. "It's perfect," he whispered when she finished. "You're perfect." Camille recorded the piece on her phone, wanting to preserve it exactly as it sounded in that moment. She played it over and over during the next few weeks, fine-tuning small details, making sure every note was exactly right. "This is going in my senior portfolio," she said. "My professor thinks I have a real chance at the composition fellowship." Julian had no doubt she would get it. Camille's talent was undeniable, her work ethic unmatched. They talked about the future constantly, making plans for after graduation. Julian wanted to start his company in Boston. Camille hoped to work with a music education nonprofit while composing on the side. They would get a small apartment, adopt a cat, build a life together. It was all planned out, all perfect until the phone call. It came on a Tuesday in March, during their usual afternoon in the practice room. Camille's phone rang and she glanced at the screen with a frown. "It's the hospital near my hometown," she said, confusion evident in her voice. "Hello." Julian watched her face change as she listened to whoever was on the other end. The color drained from her cheeks. Her hand started shaking so badly she nearly dropped the phone. "What?" she whispered. "No. No, that's not, when." She listened for another minute, then ended the call and sat down hard on the piano bench, staring at nothing. "Camille, what happened?" Julian asked, kneeling beside her. "My mother," Camille said, her voice hollow. "She had a stroke at work. She's in critical condition. They don't know if she'll." She could not finish the sentence. Julian pulled her into his arms, holding her while she cried. "I'll drive you home. We'll leave right now." But Camille pulled back, shaking her head. "My father. I haven't seen him since I was 10. He left when I was little. But he's still listed as next of kin and they called him too. He's flying in from California. They said he specifically asked me not to come until after the surgery tomorrow. He doesn't want me to see her like this." "That's ridiculous," Julian said. "You have every right to be there." "I know, but..." Camille wiped her eyes. "Maybe he's right. Maybe it would just make things more stressful. The surgery is at 8 in the morning. I'll drive home tomorrow night after we know more." Julian did not like it, but he respected her decision. He spent the rest of the day and all of Wednesday with her, keeping her distracted, making sure she ate, holding her when the fear became too much. The call came Wednesday evening. The surgery had been successful. Camille's mother was stable but would need extensive rehabilitation. "I need to go home," Camille said. "I need to help her recover. She's done everything for me and now I need to be there." "Of course," Julian said. "I'll come with you. We'll figure it out together." But Camille shook her head. "You have your thesis presentation next week. The investors are coming to hear your business pitch. You can't miss that, Julian. Your whole future depends on it. You're more important than any presentation." "No. Camille took his hands, her expression fierce. Don't give up your dreams for this. I'll be back in a few weeks once I know she's stable. We'll pick up right where we left off. Julian wanted to argue, but Camille had already made up her mind. She packed her bags Thursday morning, kissed him goodbye and promised to call every day. I love you, she said. This is just temporary. A few weeks at most. I love you too, Julian replied. Drive safe. He watched her car disappear down the street, already missing her, but confident that she would be back soon. They had plans. They had a future. He did not know it would be the last time he would ever see her. Tessa stood in the lobby of Reed Enterprises, feeling completely out of place in her worn jacket and patched jeans. The building was all glass and steel, modern and imposing, with sleek furniture and abstract art on the walls. Everyone who passed her looked polished and professional, moving with the confidence of people who belonged. She had received a call that morning from Julian's assistant, a brisk woman named Patricia who had scheduled her for an 11 o'clock meeting. Patricia had arranged for Ruby's medical evaluations to begin that afternoon at one of the best children's hospitals in the city, and Tessa had spent the morning crying in her bathroom out of sheer relief and disbelief. Now she was here, about to meet with the man who had offered to change her life, and she had no idea what to expect. Miss Brooks? The receptionist smiled at her. Mr. Reed will see you now. Take the elevator to the 30th floor. Tessa's stomach churned as the elevator rose, carrying her higher and higher until the doors opened onto a bright, spacious office floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered stunning views of the city below. Patricia met her at the elevator, professional but kind. Right this way, Ms. Brooks. Mr. Reed is expecting you. She led Tessa down a hallway to a corner office that was somehow both impressive and comfortable. The walls were lined with bookshelves, and the desk was covered with neat stacks of documents. Julian stood by the window looking out at the city but turned when they entered. Tessa, thank you for coming. He smiled, and Tessa noticed he looked tired, as if he had not slept well. Please sit down. Patricia left, closing the door behind her. Tessa sat in one of the leather chairs facing Julian's desk, folding her hands in her lap to keep them from fidgeting. I've arranged for your daughter to see Dr. Sarah Mitchell this afternoon, Julian said, sitting across from her. She's one of the top pediatric specialists in the country. Whatever Ruby needs, Dr. Mitchell and her team will handle it. All costs covered. Tessa felt her eyes burn with tears. I don't know how to thank you. You don't have to thank me. Julian leaned forward, his expression earnest. I meant what I said last night. I want to help. But why? The question burst out of her before she could stop it. You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. I can't understand why you would do this. Julian was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. The song you played last night, Winter's Promise, it was written by someone I loved very much. Someone I lost 15 years ago. Hearing it again brought back a lot of memories, some painful but also reminded me of who I used to be. Who I wanted to be. He stood and walked to a bookshelf, pulling out a framed photograph. He hesitated, then handed it to Tessa. The photo showed a young man and woman, clearly college-aged, standing in front of a Christmas tree. The man was obviously Julian, younger and less polished but with the same kind eyes. The woman beside him was beautiful, with dark hair and a bright smile. They looked happy, in love, full of hope. Her name was Camille Wright, Julian said quietly. She was a music composition major. Winter's Promise was the last piece she ever composed as far as I know. She wrote it during our final year of college. Tessa stared at the photo, something stirring in the back of her mind, a whisper of recognition that made no sense. What happened to her? Her mother had a stroke and was hospitalized. Camille went home to care for her. She promised to come back in a few weeks. Julian returned to his chair, his expression distant with memory. She called me every day for the first week. Then the call stopped. I tried reaching her, but her phone was disconnected. I drove to her hometown, but her apartment was empty. Her mother had died and Camille was gone. I'm so sorry, Tessa whispered. I hired investigators. I filed missing persons reports. Nothing. Julian rubbed his face, exhausted. For years I looked for her. But it was like she had vanished into thin air. Eventually, I had to accept that either something terrible had happened, or she simply did not want to be found. You never stopped loving her, Tessa said. It was not a question. Julian met her eyes. No. I built my company, I kept moving forward, but I never stopped hoping I would see her again. Hearing that melody last night, it felt like a sign. Like maybe I could finally do something good in her memory. Tessa carefully set the photo on the desk, her hands trembling. That strange sense of recognition would not leave her alone, but she could not grasp it, could not understand what it meant. "I'll play the song for you whenever you want," she said. "And I'll accept your job offer if it's still available. I'll work hard. I promise." "The offer stands," Julian confirmed. "Patricia will handle the details. For now, focus on Ruby and her treatment." They talked for another half hour about logistics and schedules. Tessa learned that Julian's company specialized in business consulting and venture capital, helping small businesses grow and succeed. He was genuinely proud of the work they did, the lives they impacted. When Tessa finally left his office, her head was spinning. Julian Reed was not what she expected. He was kind, genuine, haunted by a lost love but not bitter. He had offered help without strings, without demands, and she found herself trusting him in a way that should have been impossible after knowing him for less than 24 hours. She picked up Ruby from Mrs. Chen's apartment and took her to the hospital for the evaluation. Dr. Mitchell was warm and thorough, explaining every test and procedure in language Ruby could understand. By the end of the afternoon, they had a comprehensive treatment plan that would require surgery followed by several months of therapy. "The prognosis is excellent," Dr. Mitchell said with a smile. "Ruby should make a full recovery." Tessa cried again right there in the doctor's office, while Ruby hugged her tight and whispered, "It's okay, Mama. Everything is okay now." That evening, Tessa sat at their apartment's small electric keyboard, the sheet music for Winter's Promise, spread in front of her. She played it slowly, thinking about Julian's story, about the mysterious Camille who had written such a beautiful piece and then disappeared. The melody felt different now that she knew its history. Each note carried weight, meaning loss. Tessa played the bridge section, where the music shifted from hopeful to melancholy, and felt that strange whisper of recognition again. Why did this song feel familiar? She had only learned it 5 years ago from sheet music in a thrift store. But sometimes, when she played it, she felt like she was remembering something rather than creating something. Like the melody existed in her bones, written there long before she ever touched the keys. Tessa shook off the strange feeling and kept playing. Probably just her imagination, running wild after an emotional 2 days. She had no connection to Julian's lost love, no mysterious past. She was just a single mother who had gotten incredibly lucky. Nothing more. 2 weeks after their first meeting, Julian invited Tessa to dinner at a restaurant called Luminaire, a bright and elegant establishment with white tablecloths and crystal chandeliers. Tessa had protested that she had nothing appropriate to wear, and Julian had sent Patricia with a beautiful red dress that fit perfectly. "You didn't have to do this," Tessa said as they were seated at a corner table with a view of the city lights. "I know," Julian replied. "But I wanted to talk more about the music. About Camille. If that's all right with you." Tessa nodded, curious despite herself. Over the past 2 weeks, she had seen Julian 3 times when he checked on Ruby's progress at the hospital. He had been kind and attentive, bringing Ruby books and small toys, making her laugh with silly stories about business meetings gone wrong. Ruby adored him, and Tessa had found herself looking forward to his visits more than she wanted to admit. They ordered their meals, and then Julian leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "Tell me about yourself," he said. "How did you end up in the city? Do you have family here?" Tessa wrapped her hands around her water glass, the familiar discomfort of this question settling over her. "I don't really have family. I don't remember them anyway." Julian's eyebrows rose. "You don't remember them?" "I was in a car accident 12 years ago," Tessa explained, the words coming easier than they usually did. I don't know why, but talking to Julian felt safe. "I was in a coma for 3 weeks. When I woke up, I had no memory of anything before the accident. No identification, no one came looking for me. The hospital staff called me Tessa because I was wearing a charm bracelet with that name engraved on it, and Brooks because the nurse who found me was named Brooks and felt sorry for me." Julian's face had gone very still. "You have amnesia." "Complete retrograde amnesia for everything before the accident," Tessa confirmed. "I've tried over the years to recover memories or find information about my past, but nothing ever came of it. Eventually, I accepted that whoever I was before is just gone." "How old were you when the accident happened?" "The doctors estimated I was in my early 20s. I'm 34 now, so I would have been about 22. Julian's hands tightened on his napkin. "Where did the accident happen?" "A small town called Meadowbrook, about 2 hours from here." Tessa frowned at Julian's reaction. "What? Is something wrong?" Julian looked like he was trying very hard to keep his composure. "Camille's mother lived in Meadowbrook. That's where Camille went when her mother got sick. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Tessa felt her heart start to race, but she forced herself to think logically. "That's a coincidence," she said, though her voice sounded uncertain even to her own ears. "Meadowbrook is not that small. Thousands of people live there." "What month did your accident happen?" "March. March 23rd, 12 years ago." Julian pulled out his phone with shaking hands, scrolling through something. "Camille disappeared in late March, 15 years ago." He looked up at Tessa, and his eyes were filled with desperate hope. "Could you be older than you think? Could the doctors have been wrong?" Tessa could not finish the sentence. The room felt like it was spinning. "No, this is crazy. I'm not her. I don't look like her." But even as she said it, she thought of the photograph Julian had shown her. The woman in that photo had similar features, similar eyes. Older now, worn down by struggle, but maybe, possibly. "I need to see that photo again," Tessa whispered. Julian pulled out his phone and brought up a digital copy. He enlarged it and handed the phone across the table. Tessa stared at the image, at Camille's smile and the way she leaned into Julian's embrace. "I don't remember this," Tessa said, but her voice cracked. "I would remember being in love. I would remember you." "Not if the amnesia was severe enough," Julian said carefully. "Tessa, I'm not trying to convince you of something that is not true. But the coincidences are adding up. The location, the timing, the music." "The music," Tessa repeated. She set down the phone and looked at Julian. "I found the sheet music in a thrift store in Meadowbrook. 5 years ago, I went back there to see if anything would trigger memories. I was browsing in this little shop, and the music was just sitting in a box of old books. I bought it on impulse." "What if it was your music?" Julian asked. "What if you were drawn to it because some part of you remembered writing it?" Tessa pressed her hands to her temples, trying to think through the implications. "If I am Camille, then why wouldn't I have been reported missing? Why wouldn't someone have identified me in the hospital?" "I don't know," Julian admitted. "But I'm going to find out. Will you let me have your hospital records from the accident? And maybe a DNA sample? I can compare it to anything I might still have from Camille." Tessa should have said no. This was all too much, too fast, too impossible. But that strange whisper of recognition she had felt before was growing stronger, turning into a persistent nagging that something about all of this was true. "Okay," she said. "But Julian, you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that I'm not her. That this is all just a series of strange coincidences." "I know," Julian said, but Tessa could see in his eyes that he had already let himself hope. "I just need to know for sure." They finished dinner in relative silence, both lost in their own thoughts. When Julian dropped Tessa off at her apartment building, he took her hand and squeezed it gently. "Whatever we find out, it doesn't change the fact that I want to help you and Ruby," he said. "That's not conditional on who you used to be." "Thank you," Tessa whispered. She went upstairs and relieved Mrs. Chin, then checked on Ruby, who was sleeping peacefully in her small bedroom. Tessa stood in the doorway for a long time, watching her daughter breathe, thinking about the possibility that her entire understanding of herself might be wrong. If she was Camille Wright, then she had a whole life before the accident. Parents, maybe siblings, friends, a career. And Julian. She had loved Julian and left him without explanation. Tessa pulled out her phone and looked at the photo Julian had sent her. She zoomed in on Camille's face, searching for herself in those features. The nose was the same. The shape of the jaw. The eyes, though older and sadder now, still had the same depth. "Who are you?" Tessa whispered to the image. She did not sleep that night. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, feeling like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, about to step off into nothing. Julian hired the best private investigator in the city, a woman named Rachel Park who specialized in cold cases and missing persons. Within a week, Rachel had obtained Tessa's hospital records from 12 years ago and had begun the painstaking process of cross-referencing them with everything known about Camille's disappearance. Julian met with Rachel in his office on a gray Monday morning, anxious for any news. "The timing aligns perfectly," Rachel said, spreading documents across his desk. "Camille's last confirmed contact with anyone was March 20th, 15 years ago. She called her roommate and said she was staying in Meadowbrook to care for her mother. 3 days later, on March 23rd, a young woman matching Camille's description was brought into Meadowbrook General Hospital after a severe car accident." Julian's heart pounded. "It's her." "Probably, but we need more confirmation." The accident victim had no identification. The car she was driving had been reported stolen 2 days earlier from a parking lot in Meadowbrook. The police assumed she was a transient or runaway. Where was the accident? Rural highway on the outskirts of town. Single vehicle crash. The car hit a tree at high speed. The victim suffered severe head trauma, broken ribs, and internal injuries. Rachel looked up from her notes. She was lucky to survive it all. Julian thought of Tessa, of everything she had endured. What about Camille's mother? What happened to her? Rachel's expression turned grim. Camille's mother, Susan Wright, had a stroke on March 18. She underwent surgery the next day and was recovering well. But on March 22, she had a second stroke and died. The day before the accident, Julian whispered. Yes. And here's where it gets interesting. Rachel pulled out another document. Susan Wright's funeral was held on March 25. The funeral home records show that her daughter Camille was listed as next of kin, but she never showed up. In fact, there's no record of anyone named Camille Wright attending or being involved in any of the arrangements. Because she was in a coma, Julian said. That's my theory. But here's another complication. Rachel pointed to a name in the document. Susan's ex-husband, Thomas Wright, handled all the funeral arrangements. He also had Susan's apartment cleaned out within a week of her death. Everything was either sold or thrown away. Julian felt sick. He erased all evidence of Camille's existence. It looks that way. I've been trying to contact Thomas Wright, but he passed away 8 years ago. Heart attack. He had no other children, no living relatives that I can find. So when Camille woke up from the coma with amnesia, there was no one left who could identify her, Julian said slowly. Her mother was dead, her father was gone, and he had already gotten rid of all her belongings. She became a ghost. Rachel nodded. The hospital kept her for 2 months after she woke up, trying to find her identity or any family. When nothing turned up, she was transferred to state care and eventually placed in transitional housing. She aged out of the system at 25 and has been on her own ever since. Julian stood and walked to the window, his mind racing. All those years he had searched for Camille, she had been lost in a broken system, struggling alone with no memory of who she was. If he had just looked harder, searched longer, maybe he could have found her. Don't do that, Rachel said, reading his expression. You couldn't have known. The hospital listed her as Jane Doe, and by the time she was transferred to state care, she had been assigned the name Tessa Brooks. There was no connection to Camille Wright in any database. I need DNA confirmation, Julian said. Is there any way to get Camille's DNA? I've been working on that. Camille rented an apartment near campus her senior year. I contacted the current landlord, and they still have some items in storage from tenants who left things behind. There's a box labeled with Camille's name. I'm having it shipped here. How long? 2 days. Julian nodded, trying to be patient. What about Ruby? Has Tessa ever mentioned Ruby's father? I asked Tessa about that yesterday, Rachel said. She said Ruby was born about 4 years after the accident. She doesn't remember the father. Her memories start with waking up in the hospital and everything after that is clear, but those first few years were chaotic. She was dealing with trauma, trying to figure out who she was. She had a brief relationship that resulted in Ruby, but the father was not involved. Julian's jaw tightened. He hated thinking of Tessa, possibly Camille, alone and vulnerable during those years. Keep digging, he said. I need to know everything. Rachel left, and Julian sat alone in his office, staring at the photo of Camille on his phone. If Tessa was Camille, then the woman he loved had been alive all this time, suffering and struggling while he built his empire. The guilt was overwhelming. He called Tessa that afternoon. How are you? He asked when she answered. Overwhelmed, Tessa admitted. Ruby's surgery is scheduled for next week. I should be focused on that, but all I can think about is this investigation. Julian, what if I am her? What if my whole life is a lie? Your life with Ruby is not a lie, Julian said firmly. Whatever we discover about your past, it doesn't erase the person you've become. You're an amazing mother, a talented musician, a survivor. That's real. He heard her take a shaky breath. Thank you. I needed to hear that. Do you want to come to dinner tomorrow? You, me, and Ruby. Somewhere casual, kid-friendly. I think we could all use something normal. That sounds perfect, Tessa said, and Julian could hear the smile in her voice. They ended the call, and Julian allowed himself a moment of hope. Whether Tessa was Camille or not, he knew one thing for certain. He was falling in love with her. Not with the memory of who she might have been, but with the person she was now. Strong, resilient, kind despite everything life had thrown at her. If she was Camille, it would be a miracle. But even if she was not, Julian realized he did not want to lose her. The DNA results came back on a Thursday afternoon. Rachel called Julian immediately, her voice tight with emotion. "It's a match," she said. "Tessa Brooks is Camille Wright. There's no doubt." Julian sat down hard in his desk chair, his entire body shaking. 15 years. 15 years of searching, grieving, hoping, and all along Camille had been alive. Lost but alive. "I need to tell her," he said. "Does she know you took the sample?" "Yes. I explained we were testing against items from Camille's apartment. She signed all the consent forms." Rachel paused. "Julian, she needs to hear this from you. And she needs support. Finding out your entire identity is different from what you thought. It's traumatic." "I know. I'll go to her now." Julian left the office immediately, not bothering to tell Patricia where he was going. He drove to Tessa's apartment building, his mind racing with everything he wanted to say, everything he needed to explain. He knocked on her door and she answered with Ruby at her side. The girl wore a green shirt with a cartoon character on it, her face bright and happy. "Mr. Reed," Ruby exclaimed. "Did you come to see my drawings? I made one of you." Julian managed to smile despite the turmoil in his chest. "I'd love to see it. But first I need to talk to your mom about something important. Maybe you could show me the drawing after?" Ruby looked between them, her child's intuition picking up on the tension. "Is something wrong?" "Everything is okay, sweetie," Tessa said, though her face had gone pale. She had seen Julian's expression and knew what it meant. "Why don't you play in your room for a little bit? Mr. Reed and I need to have a grown-up conversation." Ruby nodded and skipped off to her bedroom, closing the door behind her. Tessa turned to Julian, her hands clasped together so tightly her knuckles were white. "The results came back," Julian said. "It was not a question." "Tell me." Julian took a deep breath. "You're Camille Wright. The DNA is a perfect match." Tessa did not move, did not react, for what felt like an eternity. Then she slowly walked to the couch and sat down, staring at nothing. "I need you to tell me everything," she whispered. "From the beginning. Who was I?" Julian sat beside her, keeping a respectful distance, and began to talk. He told her about their meeting in the practice room, about falling in love, about Winter's promise, and all their dreams for the future. He told her about her mother's stroke, about her father Thomas Wright appearing and telling her to wait. "Your mother died on March 22nd, Julian said gently. "We think you were driving to your father's house, probably to confront him about the funeral arrangements, when you crashed. You were in a coma for 3 weeks. By the time you woke up, your mother was buried, your father had cleaned out your apartment, and there was no one left who knew you." "He just left me there," Tessa said, her voice hollow. "My own father left me in a hospital with no identity." "I don't think he knew," Julian said. "The accident happened outside of town. You had no ID. By the time you woke up, he had probably already left Meadowbrook. He might have thought you had just run away." Tessa pressed her hands to her face. "I had a whole life. A career. And it's all just gone." "Not gone," Julian said carefully. "Changed. Tessa, you're still the same person. You just have more history than you knew about." "Am I?" Tessa looked at him with tears streaming down her face. "You loved Camille. You've been looking for Camille for 15 years. But I'm not her anymore. I don't remember being her. I don't remember loving you." The words hit Julian like a physical blow, but he forced himself to stay calm. "I know. And I'm not asking you to suddenly have feelings you don't have. I'm just asking you to let me help you process this." Tessa stood abruptly and walked to the window, hugging herself. "Ruby, does this mean I know who her father is?" Julian shook his head. "Ruby was born 4 years after the accident. Her father is not part of your previous life." "So at least she's mine," Tessa whispered. "At least that's still true." They sat in silence for a long time. Julian wanted to reach for her, to hold her and promise that everything would be okay, but he knew she needed space to process. "What happens now?" Tessa finally asked. "That's up to you," Julian said. "I have more information if you want it. Photos, recordings, letters. But you can also choose not to look at any of it. You can decide how much of Camille you want to reclaim." Tessa turned to face him, her expression torn. "Do you want me to be her? Do you want me to remember?" Julian stood and walked to her, stopping a few feet away. "I want you to be whoever you want to be. If remembering would help you, then yes, I hope you remember. But if Tessa Brooks is who you are now, then that's who I want to know." "You can't mean that. You've been looking for Camille for 15 years. "I have," Julian admitted. "But meeting you these past few weeks, I've realized something. I fell in love with Camille because of who she was, her kindness, her strength, her dreams. And Tessa has all those qualities too. You've survived things Camille never had to face. You've raised a beautiful daughter on your own. You're remarkable. Tessa laughed, a broken sound. I'm a mess. You're human. And I. Julian stopped, knowing he had to be careful. I care about you. Not because of who you used to be, but because of who you are. Tessa stared at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I need time. I need to think about all of this. Take all the time you need, Julian said. I'm not going anywhere. He left her apartment feeling drained but also strangely hopeful. The truth was out. Camille was alive. Now they just had to figure out what that meant for all of them. Will you walk away from the truth if it means losing yourself? Or do you embrace a past you can't remember? Comment below what you choose and subscribe to see what Tessa decides. Tessa spent 3 days alone with her thoughts, asking Mrs. Chen to watch Ruby more than usual because she could not trust herself to be present. She called in sick to the part-time job she still held at a grocery store, even though Julian's support meant she technically did not need it anymore. She needed routine, something familiar, but she could not force herself to go through the motions. On the third night, she finally opened the box Julian had left with her. It contained photos, letters, and a small USB drive labeled Camille's Music. Tessa started with the photos. They showed a younger her, though she still struggled to think of that woman as herself, laughing with friends, sitting at a piano, wearing a graduation gown. In every photo with Julian, she looked radiantly happy. I was loved, Tessa whispered, tracing the image with her finger. I had people who cared about me. The letters were harder. Most were from Julian to Camille, written during a summer they had spent apart during an internship. They were full of inside jokes and sweet declarations, plans for their future. I can't wait until August when you're back, one letter read. The practice room feels empty without you. I tried studying there yesterday and gave up after 10 minutes. Everything reminds me of you. Tessa cried reading them, mourning a love she could not remember but that clearly had been real and deep. Finally, she plugged the USB drive into her old laptop. It contained audio files of Camille's compositions. Tessa clicked on the first one labeled Autumn Thoughts. The melody that poured from the laptop speakers was hauntingly beautiful, piano mixed with soft strings. It was accomplished, professional, the work of someone with real talent. Tessa listened to file after file, hearing versions of herself that felt like a stranger. Then she reached the last file, Winter's Promise Original Recording. She hesitated before clicking play, knowing this would be the most difficult. This was the melody she had been playing for 5 years, the one that had brought Julian back into her life. The recording started, and Tessa heard her own voice, younger and brighter, speaking before the music began. Okay, take 12. Julian, if this one doesn't work, I'm giving up and just submitting take 7. Laughter. Here we go. Winter's Promise, for the man who makes me believe in the future. Then the music started, and Tessa listened with tears streaming down her face. This version was slightly different from the sheet music she had found. More ornate, with extra flourishes in the bridge. But it was fundamentally the same song, the same heart. When it ended, Tessa sat in silence for a long time. Then she picked up her phone and called Julian. I listened to the recordings, she said when he answered. How are you feeling? Julian asked, concern evident in his voice. Lost. Found. I don't know. Tessa wiped her eyes. Can you come over tomorrow? I want to try something. Of course. What time? Morning. 10 o'clock. And bring your laptop if you have more recordings or videos. Julian arrived exactly at 10, carrying a briefcase full of materials. Ruby was at a playdate with a school friend, giving them privacy. Tessa had set up her keyboard in the living room and placed the sheet music for Winter's Promise on the stand. I want to play the melody while you show me pictures and videos, Tessa explained. My therapist suggested that combining sensory experiences might trigger memories. Music is clearly important to who I was. Maybe it's the key. Julian nodded and opened his laptop on the coffee table where Tessa could see the screen. He pulled up a folder of photos and videos. Ready? He asked. Tessa positioned her hands on the keyboard. Ready. She began to play and Julian started a slideshow of images. College campus in autumn. Camille sitting in a practice room. Julian and Camille at a coffee shop. A video of Camille playing piano, her fingers flying across the keys while she hummed along. Tessa played and watched, trying to feel something, anything that would connect her to these images. Her fingers moved automatically through the familiar melody while her eyes tracked the stranger who was supposed to be her. Then Julian played a video that made Tessa's hands falter on the keys. It showed Camille and Julian in what looked like a dorm room, decorating a small Christmas tree. They were laughing, teasing each other about ornament placement. Then Julian had surprised Camille with a kiss under makeshift mistletoe, and she had laughed and kissed him back, her joy evident in every line of her body. "I love you," Video Camille said, pulling back to look at Julian. "I love you so much it scares me." "Don't be scared," Video Julian replied. "We're going to have the most amazing future." Tessa had stopped playing entirely, staring at the screen with her breath caught in her throat. Something about that moment, about the way Camille had looked at Julian, sparked something deep in her mind. "I love you so much it scares me." The words echoed in Tessa's head, and suddenly she was somewhere else, seeing a different moment. Standing in snow outside a university building, Julian's arms around her, feeling safe and loved and terrified all at once because how could anything this good be real? "Tessa." Julian's voice pulled her back to the present. He had paused the video and was watching her with concern. "Are you all right?" "I remembered something," Tessa whispered. "Just a flash. We were standing in snow. You were holding me. I felt..." She struggled to find the words. "Safe, happy, scared." Julian's expression transformed, hope lighting up his features. "It was probably after we first said we loved each other. It had just started snowing. We stood outside the Fine Arts building for almost an hour just talking and holding each other." Tessa closed her eyes, trying to hold on to the memory, but it slipped away like water through her fingers. "It's gone. I can't get it back." "It's a start," Julian said gently. "The doctors said some memories might return as fragments. You don't have to force it." But Tessa did want to force it. Now that she had felt even a tiny piece of that past life, she wanted more. She wanted to remember being loved like that, being happy and hopeful instead of struggling and alone. She turned back to the keyboard and started playing again, more aggressively this time, demanding that the music give her back what she had lost. Julian continued the slideshow, and Tessa watched while her fingers moved through the melody over and over. Another flash. Walking through campus in autumn, leaves crunching underfoot. Julian beside her, talking about his dreams for a company that would help people. Her hand in his, warm despite the cold air. Another. Sitting in the practice room, composing Winter's Promise, while Julian studied nearby. Looking up to find him watching her with such love in his eyes that it took her breath away. Another. Her mother's funeral, except she was not there. She was in a hospital bed, unconscious, while strangers buried her mother and erased her life. That last image was not a memory but an imagined scene, her mind filling in gaps with logical guesses. But it broke something loose in Tessa and she suddenly could not play anymore. She pulled her hands away from the keyboard and pressed them to her face, sobbing. Julian was beside her immediately, pulling her into his arms. "It's okay. You don't have to do this now." "I want to remember," Tessa cried into his shoulder. "I want to remember loving you. I want to remember my mother. I want to remember who I was." I know. Julian held her tight, one hand stroking her hair. "But you don't have to get it all back at once. We have time." "Do we?" Tessa pulled back to look at him. "What if I never remember? What if I'm like this forever, knowing I had this whole life but never being able to access it?" "Then we build new memories," Julian said firmly. "Tessa, I need you to understand something. Yes, I loved Camille. Yes, I searched for her for 15 years. But these past few weeks, getting to know you, watching you with Ruby, seeing your strength and kindness, I've realized something important. I'm falling in love with you, not just the memory of who you were." Tessa stared at him, her heart pounding. "You can't mean that." "I do. You're not just Camille with amnesia. You're Tessa, a woman who survived impossible circumstances and built a life for herself and her daughter. You learned that melody from sheet music and made it your own. You're remarkable in ways Camille never had to be." "I'm broken," Tessa whispered. "You're healing. There's a difference." Julian cupped her face gently. "I'm not asking you to love me back. I'm just telling you the truth. Whatever happens, whether you remember or not, I'm here. I care about you and I care about Ruby. That's not going to change." Tessa felt something shift in her chest, a wall she had not known she was building starting to crack. She had been so focused on trying to become Camille again that she had not let herself feel anything for Julian as Tessa. But now, sitting in his arms, feeling his steady heartbeat beneath her cheek, she realized she had been falling for him too. Not because of a past she could not remember but because of who he was now. Kind, patient, generous. He had walked into her life and changed everything and she was grateful beyond words. "I think I'm falling for you too," she admitted quietly. "Not as Camille. As me. As Tessa." Julian's arms tightened around her. "That's all I need." They sat like that for a long time, holding each other while the afternoon light streamed through the windows. Eventually Tessa pulled back and wiped her eyes. Ruby will be home soon. She's been asking about you constantly. I think she wants you to be her father. Julian smiled, soft and genuine. I'd be honored. If you'll let me. Let's take it slow, Tessa said. I need time to adjust to all of this. But yes, I want you in our lives. Slow is good, Julian agreed. We have time. Later that evening, after Ruby had come home and Julian had stayed for dinner, entertaining Ruby with stories and helping clean up afterward, Tessa stood at her window watching him drive away. Her mind was still a mess, her emotions tangled and complicated, but underneath all the confusion was a growing sense of hope. She was Camille Wright, but she was also Tessa Brooks. She could be both. She could honor the past while building a future. And maybe, just maybe, she could learn to love again. Ruby's surgery went perfectly. Dr. Mitchell had called it textbook, and Ruby had recovered faster than expected, bouncing back with the resilience only children seem to possess. Within 2 weeks, she was back to her normal energetic self, running and playing without the pain that had limited her for so long. Tessa cried watching Ruby play in the park one afternoon, overwhelmed with gratitude. Julian stood beside her, his hand in hers, and she squeezed his fingers tight. Thank you, she said for what felt like the 100th time. I can never repay you for this. You don't have to repay me, Julian replied. Seeing Ruby healthy is all the payment I need. They had fallen into a comfortable rhythm over the past month. Julian came to dinner twice a week, sometimes bringing takeout from nice restaurants, other times just ingredients to cook together in Tessa's small kitchen. Ruby adored him, following him around and chattering about school and friends and all the things 8-year-olds found important. Tessa had also continued therapy, working with a specialist in trauma and memory recovery. Some sessions brought small fragments of memory back. Others brought nothing. Dr. Lisa Ramos had explained that recovery was not linear, that Tessa might never get everything back, and that was okay. You're grieving a life you can't remember, Dr. Ramos had said during one session. That's valid and real. But you're also building a new life, and that's valid too. Both things can be true at once. Tessa had started going through more of Camille's belongings with Julian's help. They had retrieved boxes from storage filled with textbooks, sheet music, awards from competitions, and personal items that Camille had left in her campus apartment. Each item was a small piece of a puzzle Tessa was trying to assemble. One evening, Tessa found a journal buried in the bottom of a box. She opened it carefully, seeing Camille's handwriting fill the pages with thoughts and dreams and daily observations. November 3rd. Julian asked me to coffee today. Actual, official, this is a date coffee, not just studying together coffee. I said yes so fast I probably sounded desperate. I don't even care. He makes me feel like I can do anything. December 15th. I played Winter's Promise for Julian today. Just the first half because the second part isn't finished yet. He cried. Actually cried. I've never had someone react to my music like that. It makes me want to be better, write better, create things that matter. March 10th. Mom called tonight. She sounded tired. I'm worried about her, but she insists she's fine. Julian thinks I should go visit during spring break. He's probably right. I just hate leaving him for that long. Tessa read entry after entry, getting glimpses of Camille's inner life. It was strange reading her own thoughts from 15 years ago, thoughts she had no memory of having. But it was also enlightening, helping her understand who she had been. The journal ended abruptly on March 18th. The hospital called. Mom had a stroke. Surgery tomorrow. I'm driving home tonight. Julian offered to come, but he has his big presentation this week. I told him to stay. I'll be back in a few weeks. Everything will be fine. Tessa closed the journal, her throat tight. Everything had not been fine. Her mother had died. She had crashed. 15 years had been lost. But she also had Ruby. She had survived. She had built something from nothing. That was not insignificant. I want to visit Meadowbrook, Tessa told Julian one evening while they were watching Ruby play in her room. I want to see where the accident happened. Where my mother is buried. Maybe it will help trigger more memories. Julian nodded. I'll come with you if you want company. I'd like that. They made the trip on a Saturday, leaving early in the morning. Ruby stayed with Mrs. Chen, who had become like a grandmother to the girl. The drive took 2 hours, and Tessa spent most of it quietly looking out the window trying to recognize anything. Nothing felt familiar until they reached the town limits, and then Tessa experienced a strange sense of déjà vu. Not memory exactly, but a feeling of having been there before. Julian drove them first to the cemetery where Camille's mother was buried. They stood in front of Susan Wright's modest headstone, and Tessa placed flowers she had brought from the city. "I wish I remembered her," Tessa said quietly. "She must have loved me so much. Worked so hard to give me opportunities." "She did," Julian confirmed. "You talked about her all the time in college. How proud she was of your music, how she saved every cent to afford your lessons." Tessa touched the headstone, trying to feel some connection, but there was only sadness for a loss she could not fully comprehend. Next, they drove to the accident site. Julian had gotten the exact location from Rachel's investigation. It was a rural stretch of highway, a curve marked by a large tree that still bore a faint scar from impact. Tessa got out of the car and walked to the tree, running her hand over the rough bark. She closed her eyes and tried to remember, tried to feel something. For a moment nothing happened. Then, like a door opening in her mind, she saw something. Headlights. Rang. Her hands gripping a steering wheel. Tears streaming down her face as she drove too fast, not caring about safety, just needing to get somewhere. "My father's house," Tessa said aloud, the words coming from somewhere deep inside. "I was going to his house. To yell at him. He had arranged everything for the funeral without telling me. He was going to bury my mother and I wasn't even invited." Julian was beside her immediately. "You remember?" "Pieces. I was angry. So angry I could barely see. And sad. I had just lost my mother, and my father, who had abandoned us years ago, was taking over like he had any right." Tessa opened her eyes, tears streaming down her face. "I wasn't paying attention to the road. I took the curve too fast. I remember trying to brake, but it was too late." Julian pulled her into his arms, and Tessa sobbed against his chest, mourning not just the accident but everything that had come after. The lost years, the lost identity, the lost chance to say goodbye to her mother properly. "I'm sorry," Julian murmured into her hair. "I'm so sorry you went through that." They stood there for a long time, Tessa crying out years of grief she had not known she was carrying. Eventually she pulled back and wiped her eyes. "I want to see one more place," she said. "The apartment building where I lived. If it's still there." It was still there, a small complex on the edge of town. Tessa stood in the parking lot, looking up at the second-floor window that had been hers. More memories trickled in. Carrying boxes up the stairs on move-in day. Practicing piano late at night with headphones so she wouldn't disturb neighbors. Cooking simple meals and saving money for school supplies. "I was happy here," Tessa said softly. "It wasn't much, but I was independent. I was building my life." Julian took her hand. "You can be happy again. You are happy again." Tessa nodded, realizing he was right. She had Ruby. She had music. She had Julian. She had lost one life, but she had built another. Both were valuable. Both were hers. They drove back to the city as afternoon faded into evening, and Tessa felt lighter than she had in weeks. The memories had not all come back, might never all come back, but she had enough. She knew who she had been, what she had lost, and what she had survived. That night, after picking up Ruby and getting her ready for bed, Tessa sat at her keyboard and played Winter's Promise one more time. But this time she played it not as Camille's composition but as Tessa's tribute. A bridge between who she was and who she had become. Julian sat on the couch listening, and when she finished, he applauded softly. "Beautiful," he said. "Thank you." Tessa closed the keyboard cover and walked to sit beside him. "For everything. For finding me. For being patient. For loving both versions of me. Always," Julian said, pulling her close. They sat together in comfortable silence, and Tessa felt something she had not felt in 12 years. Genuine hope for the future. Spring arrived with warm sunshine and blooming flowers. Ruby was thriving, her health completely restored, her energy boundless. She had started taking piano lessons at Julian's suggestion, and Tessa found joy in teaching her daughter the basics of music. Julian had become a permanent fixture in their lives. He and Tessa were officially dating, though they were taking things slowly, building their relationship on a foundation of friendship and trust rather than rushing into anything. Ruby was thrilled, constantly asking when Julian would move in with them or when they could be a real family. "We are a real family," Tessa told her daughter one evening while braiding her hair. "Family is about love, not about living in the same house." "But I want us to all be together all the time," Ruby said, her logic unassailable in the way of 8-year-olds. "Julian makes you smile, Mama. You're different now. Happier." Tessa could not deny it. She was happier. The weight she had carried for so long, the constant stress of money and bills and worry, had lifted. Julian had set up a trust fund for Ruby's education and future needs. He had hired Tessa as the official pianist for Reed Enterprises events, paying her generously. He had given them security and stability. But more than that, he had given Tessa companionship. Someone to talk to laugh with, to lean on when things got hard. They went on dates, sometimes fancy restaurant dinners, other times simple walks in the park with Ruby. They talked about everything, memories. Tessa was slowly recovering, Julian's work challenges, their hopes for the future. One evening in April, Julian arrived at the apartment with an unusual request. "Reed Enterprises is hosting a charity gala next month," he said. "It's our biggest event of the year, raising money for children's hospitals. I'd like you to perform Winter's Promise as the featured entertainment." Tessa hesitated. "In front of hundreds of people?" "You did it before at the gala where we met again," Julian reminded her. "But this time it would be different. I'd introduce you, explain the story behind the song. With your permission, I'd like to tell people about Camille, about you, about how music can survive even when memories don't." Tessa thought about it, anxiety warring with pride. She had come so far from the terrified woman who had played background music for $200. She had reclaimed parts of her past, built a present worth celebrating, and begun to dream about a future. "Okay," she said finally. "I'll do it." The next few weeks were a flurry of preparation. Tessa practiced obsessively, wanting the performance to be perfect. Julian helped with logistics, and Ruby became her biggest cheerleader, sitting through practice sessions and offering enthusiastic applause. One afternoon, while Julian was visiting and Ruby was doing homework at the kitchen table, the girl looked up suddenly with a serious expression. "Julian, can I ask you something?" "Of course," Julian said, setting down his coffee cup. Ruby chewed her lip, gathering courage. "Are you going to marry my mama?" Tessa choked on her tea, coughing. "Ruby, that's a very personal question." "I just want to know," Ruby said stubbornly. "Because if you are, I think you should do it soon. Mama's birthday is next month and it would be the best present ever." Julian looked at Tessa, his expression unreadable. "Ruby, your mama and I are taking things slowly. We want to make sure we're making good decisions." "But you love her, right?" Ruby pressed. "And she loves you. I can tell." "Ruby, that's enough," Tessa said firmly, though her cheeks were burning. "Go back to your homework." Ruby huffed but obeyed, and Tessa turned to Julian with an apologetic expression. "I'm sorry. She's been watching too many romantic movies with Mrs. Chen." "It's fine," Julian said, smiling. "She's not wrong though. I do love you." Tessa's breath caught. They had been dancing around those words for weeks, both feeling them but not saying them aloud. Hearing Julian say it now, so simply and directly, made her heart race. "I love you too," she said quietly. "Not just the version of you I'm remembering from the past. The you who's here now, who's been patient and kind and everything I never knew I needed." Julian reached across the couch and took her hand. "I've been thinking about what Ruby asked. Not marriage, not yet. But maybe taking the next step. What would you think about moving in together? I have a house with plenty of room, a yard for Ruby, a music room where you could practice without worrying about disturbing neighbors." Tessa's first instinct was to refuse, to insist on maintaining her independence. But she stopped herself and actually considered it. She loved Julian. Ruby loved Julian. They were already spending most of their free time together. Why not make it official? "Can I think about it?" she asked. "Take all the time you need," Julian assured her. That evening, after Julian had left, Tessa talked to Ruby while tucking her into bed. "Julian asked if we'd like to move in with him," Tessa said. "What do you think about that?" Ruby's face lit up. "Really? We could live in a big house with Julian? If we decide to, yes." Ruby was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then she said, "Would you be happy, Mama? Really happy?" Tessa brushed Ruby's hair back from her forehead, her heart swelling with love for this wise, compassionate child. "I think I would be. But this is a big decision and I want to make sure you're comfortable with it." "I love Julian," Ruby said simply. "He's good to us. He makes you smile. I want us to be a real family." "We're already a real family, sweet girl. But yes, I think I want that too." That night, Tessa lay awake thinking about everything that had brought her to this moment. 12 years ago, she had woken up with no identity, no family, no future. She had built a life from nothing, raising Ruby and surviving on determination alone. Now she had a chance at something more. A partner, a co-parent, a person who loved her for both who she had been and who she had become. It was terrifying and wonderful all at once. She picked up her phone and texted Julian. "Yes. Let's do it." His response came immediately, "I'm so happy. We'll take it slow, make it work. I love you." Tessa smiled in the darkness, feeling that familiar sense of hope bloom in her chest. She was Camille Wright and Tessa Brooks. She was a survivor and a mother and a musician. She was loved and valued and building something beautiful. The future had never looked brighter. The Reed Enterprises Charity Gala was held on a Saturday evening in May, exactly 1 year after the night Tessa had first played Winter's Promise and unknowingly reconnected with her past. The venue was the same grand ballroom, but this time, Tessa walked in not as hired help but as Julian's partner, wearing a stunning maroon dress he had insisted on buying her. Ruby walked beside her in a beautiful red dress, her hair done in elaborate braids, her face glowing with excitement. She held Tessa's hand tightly, occasionally bouncing on her toes. "There are so many people," Ruby whispered, eyes wide. "There are," Tessa agreed. "But don't worry. We're just here to enjoy ourselves and share music." They had moved into Julian's house 3 weeks earlier, and it had been an adjustment for everyone. Ruby loved having her own big bedroom and a backyard to play in. Tessa had spent hours in the music room Julian had set up, a bright space with excellent acoustics and a beautiful grand piano. It was not all perfect. They had argued about housework division and parenting approaches and how to balance their different schedules. But they had worked through every disagreement with patience and communication, building something strong. The ballroom was decorated in white and silver, elegant without being ostentatious. Round tables filled the space, and a stage at the front held a grand piano. Tessa felt her stomach flutter with nerves looking at it. "You're going to be amazing," Julian said, appearing beside her and kissing her cheek. He wore a sharp blue suit, looking every inch the successful CEO. "The performance is scheduled for 8 o'clock. Until then, just relax and enjoy the evening." They mingled with guests, Julian introducing Tessa as his girlfriend and Ruby as her daughter. People were kind and welcoming, though Tessa caught some curious looks. She knew Julian had told his board of directors about Camille's reappearance and their relationship, and news had spread through his social circles. At 7:30, Julian stood and clinked his glass for attention. The ballroom quieted as everyone turned to the stage. "Thank you all for coming tonight," Julian said into the microphone, his voice carrying across the space. "As you know, this gala raises funds for children's hospitals across the region. Last year we raised over $2 million and this year, I'm confident we'll exceed that." Applause rippled through the crowd. Julian waited for it to die down before continuing. "Tonight's entertainment is very special to me personally. Many of you know my story, how I spent 15 years searching for someone I loved who had disappeared. What you may not know is that I found her, right here in this ballroom 1 year ago tonight." He gestured to Tessa, and she felt hundreds of eyes turned toward her. Her face flushed, but she stood, Ruby's hand tight in hers. "Tessa Brooks is an extraordinary woman. She's a survivor, a talented musician, and an amazing mother. She's also Camille Wright, the woman I fell in love with in college. Severe amnesia following a car accident erased her memories and her identity. But it didn't erase her talent, her kindness, or her strength." Julian's voice grew emotional. 15 years ago, Camille wrote a piano piece called Winter's Promise. It was about new beginnings and hope for the future. Tonight, Tessa will perform it for you. But this performance means something different now. It's not just about the past. It's about the present, about second chances, about finding love even when everything seems lost. He looked directly at Tessa. "Would you join me on stage?" Tessa's heart pounded as she walked to the stage, Ruby following behind. Julian met them halfway, taking Ruby's hand and leading her to a seat in the front row before turning to Tessa. "You've got this," he whispered. "I'll be right there cheering you on." Tessa nodded, too nervous to speak. She walked to the piano and sat down, adjusting the bench. The bright lights were hot on her skin, and she could feel the weight of expectation from the crowd. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and began to play. The opening notes were soft, tentative, like the first steps on an uncertain journey. Her fingers moved across the keys, muscle memory taking over where conscious thought failed. The melody built slowly, each phrase more confident than the last. Tessa let herself get lost in the music, remembering the fragments of her past that had come back. Her mother's proud smile when she finished a difficult piece. Julian's arms around her in the snow. The practice room where she had written this melody with hope and love filling her heart. But she also thought about the present. Ruby's laughter. Julian's patience. The second chance she had been given to build a life worth living. The music swelled to its crescendo, the complex chord progressions that captured longing and loss and the bittersweet nature of memory. Tessa played with everything she had, pouring all her emotion into the keys. Then came the resolution, the final section where the melody transformed from melancholy to hopeful. This was the part Tessa had added in the past few weeks, extending the piece to give it a proper ending. She had called it The Return, and it represented coming full circle, finding home after being lost. The final notes faded into silence, and for a moment the entire ballroom held its breath. Then applause erupted, loud and sustained. People stood from their tables, a standing ovation that went on and on. Tessa stood from the piano bench, tears streaming down her face. She looked for Ruby and found her daughter on her feet, clapping wildly with the biggest smile. And there was Julian, walking onto the stage with flowers in his hand and an expression that made Tessa's heart stop. He handed her the bouquet, a stunning arrangement of winter roses, and then did something completely unexpected. He got down on one knee. The applause stopped. The entire ballroom went silent. Tessa's hands flew to her mouth, flowers forgotten as they tumbled to the floor. Tessa Brooks, Camille Wright, the woman who survived impossible odds and came back to me, Julian said, his voice shaking with emotion. I have loved you for 15 years, through loss and hope and everything in between. You are the strongest, kindest, most remarkable person I have ever known. Will you marry me? He pulled out a ring box and opened it, revealing a beautiful diamond that caught the stage lights and sparkled like captured stars. Tessa could not speak, could barely breathe. She looked at Julian's hopeful, nervous face, then at Ruby who was bouncing in her seat with excitement, then back to Julian. Yes, she finally managed, the word coming out as a sob. Yes, I'll marry you. Julian stood and slipped the ring onto her finger, and then he was kissing her while the ballroom erupted in cheers and applause. Tessa kissed him back, tasting tears, hers and his, feeling like her heart might burst with joy. When they finally broke apart, Julian kept his forehead pressed to hers. I love you, he whispered. Both versions of you, all of you, forever. I love you too, Tessa replied. Thank you for finding me. Thank you for not giving up. Ruby ran onto the stage and threw herself at them, and they caught her in a three-way hug that felt like the most perfect moment of Tessa's life. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of congratulations and celebration. The gala raised over $3 million. Tessa's performance was called moving and powerful. But all Tessa cared about was the ring on her finger and the family she had finally found. They drove home late that night, Ruby asleep in the back seat. Julian held Tessa's hand, occasionally bringing it to his lips to kiss her knuckles. When should we get married? He asked. Soon, Tessa said. I don't want to wait. We've already waited 15 years. Next month? Perfect. The wedding was held on a Saturday in June, a small ceremony in Julian's backyard with only close friends and family. Ruby served as flower girl, wearing a beautiful blue dress and taking her duties very seriously. Mrs. Chen attended as Tessa's guest of honor, crying happy tears throughout. Tessa wore a simple white dress and carried a bouquet of winter roses. She walked down a makeshift aisle to where Julian stood under an arch covered in flowers, and when he saw her, his face transformed with joy. They exchanged vows they had written themselves. Julian promised to love her through all circumstances, to support her dreams, to be the father Ruby deserved. Tessa promised to build a future with him, to trust him with her heart, to create new memories while honoring the past. When the officiant pronounced them married, Julian kissed her with such tenderness that Tessa felt like she was floating. Ruby cheered loudest of all, running to hug them both. At the reception, Tessa performed one more time. She had written a new piece over the past few weeks, a companion to Winter's Promise. She called it Forever Found, and it captured the joy of second chances, the beauty of love renewed, the hope of a shared future. Julian sat in the front row with Ruby in his lap, both of them watching Tessa play with expressions of pure love. When she finished, Ruby called out, "That's my mama," with such pride that everyone laughed. Later, as the sun set and string lights came on in the yard, Julian and Tessa danced their first dance as husband and wife. Ruby danced nearby with Mrs. Chen, giggling and spinning. "Are you happy?" Julian asked, holding Tessa close. "So happy," Tessa replied. "Happier than I ever thought possible." "Good. Because this is just the beginning. We have our whole lives ahead of us." Tessa looked around at the scene, the people who cared about them, the beautiful evening, the family she had built. She thought about everything she had survived to get to this moment. The accident, the amnesia, the years of struggle, the slow process of recovery and rebuilding. It had all been worth it. Every moment of pain had led to this, to finding her way back to love and hope and home. She kissed Julian deep and slow, pouring all her gratitude and joy into it. When they pulled apart, he was smiling, his eyes bright with unshed tears. I love you, he said. I love you too, Tessa replied. Forever and always. Ruby ran over and grabbed both their hands. Can we have cake now? They laughed and let Ruby lead them to the dessert table, a family complete and whole, ready to face whatever the future held together. As night fell and stars appeared overhead, Tessa felt a sense of peace settle over her. She was exactly where she was meant to be. The melody of winter's promise had been fulfilled, transformed into something even more beautiful than she could have imagined. This was not the ending. It was a new beginning. And it was perfect,